Welcome to Strategy Sessions brought to you by Thirsty Bandit Consulting. Episode 4, Wine Education.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Thirsty Bandits podcast. I'm Rachel. I've got Corey with me as always. And then we have a very special guest on today, one that's near and dear to my heart, who has been a wine mentor to me over my wine journey. We have Miss Noelle Allen in the house. Noelle is a co-owner of PhillyWine, where they do WSET certifications in this city. I'm really excited to have you here, Noelle, but why don't you tell our guests a little bit more about you?
Hi, Rachel and Corey. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this and what you're doing. A little bit about me. As you mentioned, I do co-own PhillyWine. We provide WSET certification here in Philadelphia, and I'm really happy to say that we've got satellites outside of Metro Philadelphia now as well. WSET is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and Rachel, I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart. We provide globally recognized certification in the wine industry, and we're appropriate for wine enthusiasts or trade professionals as well. And if you're someone who just wants to learn more about wine and you don't necessarily have time for certification, we offer one-off wine classes as well.
Which is great and kind of leads us into what we want to talk about today, which is kind of wine education as a whole for people who are building tasting rooms, who are leading tasting rooms, or hiring staff, is the importance of wine education, which is really my bread and butter, which is what I love. It's what I'm super passionate about. So having you come in to talk about education is so important because you spend so much time with it. You're teaching such in-depth knowledge in so many different topics and regions. So I guess if we're starting and you're talking to somebody who is building a tasting room, building a training program, or trying to improve it a little bit more, where would you recommend someone start in that? Like, what is the core foundation of an education program for a tasting room look like?
Okay, and first of all, I just want to thank you for asking that question. We have a lot of kind of self-proclaimed experts in our field, and I really like that you are both looking at the more formal education aspect. Not to say you cannot self-train. So I want to give you what I think are some good tips if you're going to go that route. So what I really think is going to add some real credibility to any education coming from a tasting room, whether you're self-trained or you go all the way through an intensive program, is really understanding the structural components in the wine, and then how your tasting descriptors are going to relate back to the production technique, the growing region, and the grape. Because as we know, what lands in the glass has come quite a long way, right? The wine is telling us a story. So when we're taking it apart in terms of structural components, which would be the acid, tannin, the alcohol, the flavor intensity, the finish, what those structural components are telling us about the production technique, the growing region, and the grape, there's a lot there. So when we can relate that back to what we're tasting, it gives a lot more of a complete picture of the wine. And in addition, what tasting descriptors actually mean. It's really easy for me or you or any of us to hand someone else a glass of wine and say, oh, I'm getting, blackberries and smoke and clove and cinnamon. What do those actually mean? So relating those notes back to, again, the grape, the growing region, and the production technique in an organized manner is where I think any good foundation starts.
It's funny you mentioned the blackberry concept. My wife finds blackberry in literally every red wine she drinks, right? But I think it's tricky because as we all know, all of our palates are
Mhm.
different, right? All of our sensory, and I think that there's a challenge with consistency sometimes from what a tasting room or a wine bar may have as tasting notes that they're sharing with the public, and then what the staff are sharing with them when they walk them through the wine. So I think from a consistency standpoint, it can be challenging, even if you or I taste blackberries, but if the tasting notes say something like current. I mean, we're gonna, you're gonna confuse the customer, I think, if you're throwing too many descriptors out there. So aside from those sort of fundamentals, what do you think that every tasting room employee should absolutely have? Because, obviously they're going to have the notes, they're going to be taught some of the basics, they're going to review the spec sheets for each wine that will give them those keywords. But what do you think they really need to absolutely start with? And then what do you think that they need to sort of slowly evolve over time?
Okay. And I like where you're going with that too, Corey, because in our classes, we do teach, everybody's got such different experiences and sensitivities that we're not going to generally always have the same notes on the wine. It's actually what those notes are going to end up meaning. And what you're asking now about the education employees should have. Definitely understanding primary, secondary, and tertiary notes. So when we're talking about primary notes in wine, that's going to come from the fermentation of the grape. When we're talking about secondary notes of the wine, that's going to be winemaking. That's the human element. It's going to be oak aging, malolactic conversion, carbonic maceration, lees perhaps, and then tertiary notes, which are going to be bottle age notes in the wine. So whatever descriptors we end up using, whether it's blackberry or currant to communicate a primary note, we know at least where that note falls in the wine.
No, that's great. That's a great point. And really it's those primary notes that usually lead a tasting note blurb, right? So that they don't have to get too into the weeds until they start to have a dialogue about the wine with somebody that's really truly engaged and wants to learn more.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's reading your customer who's in front of you. We do it a lot at the wine school. Most of our people are here because they want to be. So we get a lot of enthusiastic students, but some are sent by their jobs. And you can really start to base how much you're going to say about the wine and how much these notes mean and what they relate back to based on the person in front of you. Someone's just going to want their basic information. Do I like the wine or not? And then other people are going to want to know everything. So it's really starting to develop that. And this is something that will develop over time, which was the second part of your question. It's going to be reading that person in front of you.
Mhm. Yeah, I
It
mean,
goes.
churn within the hospitality space is a challenge, right? So I mean, we can only give so much time and attention and education to a new hire. So we obviously want to hit on those really key top level points early on. But thankfully, and I know Rachel is absolutely an example of this, you have people that invested in the industry or in their role and want to continue to add on to that knowledge and learn. So, but, you know, obviously the tertiary notes is certainly part of that education.
Absolutely. And I like what you're saying about evolving over time because it ties into reading the person in front of you. So as a new maybe a new employee, we can't know everything at once. This was I was talking to a student about this last night. It was one of my frustrations when I got into wine. I wanted to know everything right away because I loved it so much. And my mentor was an MW, well, he still is, but he had said to me, Noelle, this is going to take time. You're going to have to taste and taste and taste, and you're going to get the experience just like anyone will. But when we want to know so much so fast, we do have to start at something more primary like that, those building blocks, the primary, secondary, tertiary, and then reading that person in front of you is certainly what's going to, that's going to really evolve as the person does it. But a technical aspect of what's going to evolve too is understanding the quality of the wine and how these structural components interplay with each other, because sometimes they can masquerade as each other. So once you start really getting into it and over time, I think somebody leading a tasting in a tasting room is going to start evolving those skills as well.
I think this is like the cool thing. I mean, like we've been in this for a while now, right? Like we've done the deep dive, but again, like you're saying, there's a part where we all start fresh and it's terrifying. Like, I mean, I took a job with no wine knowledge at all and was like, what did I get myself into? And when you're bringing people in and you're starting to train them, like a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the verbiage is really overwhelming because you're trying to learn essentially like another lexicon of like, what does this mean? Like, what is a silky tannin? What do these things mean? So how do you think like managers or anybody that is training or building a program can take those kind of more technical aspects of wine and make them a little bit more accessible? Like, how do you explain tannin to someone? How do you explain acid or like the winemaking process? How can they take these kind of components and make it not so terrifying to digest?
Another really great question. Some of those do take time. I think when you're going to start with someone who's brand new, both teaching or maybe somebody learning, just taking that minute to actually explain what's happening in really succinct terms. We'll break it down to the most basic foundational definition when we start talking about acid and tannin. So when you're taking that sip of wine, and you don't have to go so fast. This is something I try to tell my students. We all try to go too fast. We want to take a sip and know everything. Well, just take a sip and let it sit, maybe just a second or two, but see what starts to happen. And then in terms of something like acid, how much saliva are you generating? Well, if you're generating a lot, it's a high acid wine because your body is trying to protect your teeth enamel. So it kind of explaining why these things happen and relate it back to what's actually happening. I think it helps lock in. I think it helps people lock in a little bit better on what they're experiencing. Tannin, that drying effect. So as you sit with your wine and you swallow it and you're starting to feel that drying sensation, that's the tannin overtaking. And then explaining what tannin is and how it's binding to the protein in your saliva. So when you tell people why something is happening rather than just what is happening, and here's what that sensation is called, I think that gives another dimension. It helps them really lock in.
Well,
Yeah,
let's
definitely. I
run
think,
with that. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think
Go, 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 go.
well, I was going to say we should run with that concept because, we've talked a lot about how do we get the staff to engage and extend their knowledge base through training opportunities, and then the hope is obviously they take that education and then translate it in the tasting room to the customer, so the customer can learn about these things in a way. And that is always a dialogue when we talk about dry wines, right? The difference between acidity and tannins and what makes a dry wine taste dry in your mouth, because a lot of consumers come in and they mistake acid for tannin, or they think that they're drinking dry when they're drinking semi-dry, and so there's that educational piece to it. But let's shift focus and talk about you've got a trained staff at this point. They've got some educational experience under their belts. What really separates, the consumer experience from memorable to mediocre, right? I mean, what is it? What are those elements that you have seen, that you have taught, that people have really come away from and said, "Wow, that was an amazing tasting experience that we've had because I've learned this."
I think this is such a good question because it makes me think back over the last, 10 plus years of what really stood out. And it's something I want to answer really carefully because it almost, for me, comes away from the actual wine education and more the personal interaction. But what really stands out for me when I think back over this long span of time that I've been tasting and learning about wine is the enthusiasm of the person in front of me and how well that person read me as an educator. So there's been so many stories I can think back to where maybe a tasting room manager or the tasting room person was seeing that I was getting really enthusiastic and they would go get additional wine. If I was starting to understand a concept like, oh, I think I know what acid is now. This seems like a more medium acid wine, but this one seems higher. Am I right? And they're like, you are right. Let me get a really high acid wine for you to try. So starting to really validate my own personal learning was something that I just look back and really loved. And then on the other side of that, you really don't, as an educator, you don't want to disagree with somebody who's having an experience and describing their experience. So, but I did appreciate when somebody would redirect me. So sometimes in wine, it's so subjective, so it's really hard to be ultimately very wrong, right? But there was, when I was still learning, and we're just keep going to stay with tannin and acid, when I was learning those two sensations, I was mistaking them. So I'd be like, oh, I'm getting a lot of saliva, so this is more of a high tannin wine. And I remember several people redirecting me, no, that's actually the tannin, and as someone who wanted to learn when I could put that sensation in its proper place, I just took that kind of away as a nugget of information that just like locked in a little bit better because they redirected me rather than me just going off on my own descriptors. When it comes to tasting descriptors, however, that's everyone's own experience, so you really don't want to redirect as much there. And then another thing that I really loved this happened to me at a couple different conferences around the world, just little tidbits of information that you can take away as the consumer and perhaps share with your friends so that you feel like you learned something. So for example, I was at a conference in Germany and an Italian man was sharing some Franciacorta with me, which is of course a sparkling wine. And I was like, oh yay, sparkling. And I was getting ready to dump it, and not really dump it, but I was getting ready to pour it in my glass. And he said, no, actually, the proper way to do it is to pour a tiny pillow of wine, let the wine sit, and then pour the rest, and it's going to retain the carbonation better. And it took him 2 seconds to explain that to me, and 2 seconds for me to do it and have a better experience. And then I've told people, and they've told people, and I just felt like I learned something just in that 2 second, I guess, borrowing from his experience.
Oh, I love that fun fact idea, just like insert a little something. The other piece that I really like is from on the opposite side, right, which is the enthusiasm, right? We always harp on making sure that servers or educators are enthusiastic about the product that they're pouring, but it totally does work the other way. I think the more enthusiastic you are as a customer, the more open people are going to be to go in the back and share something special with you that you may not have got if you weren't as excited about what they were trying to tell you in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where just being an educator over time, kind of going back to that second question, you start to read your crowd and they'll get better and better at that as they do it more and more. And by they, of course, I mean your tasting room educators. I'm trying to think. There was one other little tidbit that I really liked. I like to share in class, and people are always kind of mind blown. But it's something so basic and wonderful. Someone was asking how to pair Sauvignon Blanc, and pairing food and wine is its own discussion. But he gave just a quick, simple answer and said anything you would squeeze lemon over, Sauvignon Blanc will pair with. So I think just taking these little tidbits and making them real world practical is something you would take away. You don't have to practice. You don't have to practice learning tannin. Something you can kind of know right away is really going to speak well to the consumer in front of you.
Rachel, what I was thinking of is our use of Swiss Army knife when we
Yes.
when we talk about super versatile, super food friendly wines, right? Just something that they can associate outside of the wine world that makes it a little bit more digestible for them. Um,
Yeah, I mean, this is my soapbox topic. Like I could stand and scream about this all day long. So you don't want me to go down this rabbit hole, but yeah, no, you need to be able to apply it to real life for them to have real life value and application. And the lemon over, that's great. That's such a good little like tidbit for someone to take home, and they're gonna remember that. And those little things that quarter pour and then more on top, like that is the stuff that will stay with them when they leave the tasting room. So those are great little fun facts.
Yeah, and I think also we've been talking about this for a long time in the wine industry, and I think it's really happening in a lot of situations, but taking the snobbery and the elitism out of it. And of course, wine is a wonderful, nice optional thing. So it does make you feel a little bit special sometimes when you're drinking it, which it should, but we should never be exclusionary, like I know this and you don't. There should be no condescension in any of these explanations. Of course, that goes without saying, but some of the people, especially when I was learning at the very beginning, some of the MWs who know more than anybody in the world about wine, who would sit with me so patiently and treated me as a colleague to them, just helped me really relax. And just, I took away that whole fear of I don't know what I'm doing and I'm doing it all wrong, because ultimately we're not really wrong if it's our expressions, our experience. So I think that, that probably goes back to reading the person in front of you.
Approachability sells more wine,
Oh,
plain and simple, and we love hearing that from someone with your credentials, Noel, because I think it's something that we feel really passionate about as well. And it does. It doesn't matter if you're in a five-star dining experience or if you're in the corner wine shop or if you're at a local winery. If you're able to engage somebody as a human being and be approachable in your delivery, you're just going to have more success.
absolutely. I had an MW tell me a story. He was working in one of the really much, very famous and fine restaurants in New York, well known for its wine list. And a woman ordered, she wanted a white Zinfandel to drink, and she was so embarrassed to ask for it. And he was like, "If you like it, then it's good." And I just loved that story because who knows how much she knew about wine academically or not, but that's what she wanted. And he didn't say no because she wasn't supposed to have it. He said, "Here you go." And so I just love that he explained to her how it's made and the cool story behind White Zinfandel. And that was a whole experience for her rather than just feeling like, oh, I should order something I don't like as much just so to, have some social appeal. So I really liked that, just wrapping that approachability into it, like you said, Corey.
Yeah, preaching to the choir, and of course, as we do with these calls, typically we've run out of time at this point. We could do 2, 3, 4, 5 hours on this as we all just sit here and geek out on wine education and approachability. But I want to take a moment to thank Noelle for joining us today. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time. It was great.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this. I can't wait to see what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored.
Yeah, I mean we'll try to get another one on the docket down the road. Maybe again, maybe in season 2 we'll bring Noelle back to do a deeper dive in wine education.
That would be wonderful.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Strategy Sessions. We look forward to seeing you again next time.